Air quality is bad only during winters. During the rest of the year, air quality is pretty much manageable and not a problem to you.
That's a complete myth. You
Hmm.
know, I think other than monsoon, I think
Hmm.
monsoon and especially monsoon when the rains are there, the pollution does get washed out. But
Hmm.
I would say outside of monsoon, it's a year-long phenomena.
I'm your host, Vedant Vyas, and this is Positive Planet, a podcast about thoughts and ideas on climate change. Subscribe and join me on this journey to a sustainable future.
Hello, folks. We are talking with Ronak Sutaria, a crazy founder and CEO of Respirer Living Sciences, a company focused on building air quality monitoring devices and real time air pollution analytics platforms using IoT and climate sciences. With awards from NASCOM and CII and his decades of experience, Ronak is pioneer in driving change through data and is on a mission to help us lead an improvement in our living. Today, we talk with him about the burning issue of air pollution. And yes, that's a pun intended, entrepreneurship, and much more. So, Ronak, welcome to the Positive Planet. How are you doing?
Thanks, Vedant. I'm doing well. Yeah, I'm in Pune, so doing good over here.
All right. Ronak, I think air pollution is recently got another boost in the conversations that are happening, and that is because of the recent walkout of Mr. Brian Johnson from another podcast of Nikhil Kamath. According to his post, he has mentioned that Indians have generalized living with air pollution, and I somewhere feel that it can be true. But what is your view on this?
I think it's very true, and I think the podcast. Of course, I also saw it, and it touches upon important points. And they also highlight that water has had a similar problem. Where everybody now has installed a water filter. I mean, I think every urban home there is a water filter installed. But water is a fairly contained. It's a very well defined substance which you can filter, you can consume. Air, on the other hand, is all pervading. It is part of a larger system, as it was mentioned on that other podcast also. But it's a continuously ongoing substance which you're always going to be in touch with. So the issue is more challenging. The severity is more, it's more hard hitting. But yeah, I think that whatever they talked about was absolutely spot on. And it was surprising because they're obviously, they were millionaires and billionaires sitting in a five-star hotel. And there also they claimed that the AQI was 150 and PM levels were about 75. So which usually you would not find in a five-star hotel. So yeah, cause of concern.
So I've been in Gurgaon for the past 2 years, and I saw a very different picture this year's winter and last year's winter. I kind of felt that yes, there was a reduction in the terms of how much smog and visibility and all those things that you could obviously see with the naked eye. But as Brian Johnson said, that even after such improvements, do we still need to follow some precautionary measures according to you?
So I think the severity of the problem in India, it is so severe that the reductions of very marginal levels are not going to reduce your risk from the exposure. So when Delhi says it has improved to 300 levels or 350 levels from the earlier 500, your risk of having the ailments, the disease, pretty much remains. So the precautions, yes, absolutely. I think for people who have the privilege of being able to stay indoors, use filtration devices, put on mask, close windows, that is definitely a recommended thing. I think if you have young children at home, or if you have parents above 70, 75, then you absolutely, then it's not even an option. Then you absolutely have to invest in those mitigation measures. But yes, I think being aware and then taking some steps are fairly necessary these days.
I want to understand the severity of the problem. Like, we do know 300 is bad and 500 is worse. and there is a WHO scale for this. But let's say if I'm continuously in an environment where the average is close to 150 or 200, is that still bad for me? What are its effects? What have you seen?
So I think from all the published literature, but also from empirical, now because I've been in this domain for 7, 8 years, and we've been observing how it affects. So you and I actually are young, relatively young. You are much younger than me, of course. But I think we won't be able to see the difference between 150 and 250 on the body. But you take a young child, so I have two, and I have, both are less than 5 years old, and I can see the difference when the levels are 150, what happens to their breathing and their coughing, versus when the levels are 20. I can see the difference in their day-to-day performance, how they are functioning. So I think what I understand is kids below 10 and citizens above 75 will see the maximum impact of air pollution. Pregnant women is another category of people who are going to be most vulnerable. So I think there is a graded risk to this. It's not like a blanket 150 or 250 is going to affect everybody, but there is a definite segment of population which is a lot more vulnerable, and we need to protect them.
That's great insights actually. I happen to touch upon one of your reports. You recently released a Towards Clear Skies report of 2025, where you analyzed progress done by many cities based on what your network and different sensor networks in India have published data, on which there was a positive and negative both side to it. I'm going to start with the negative side to it, where around 99 cities have worse air quality in 2024 than 2023. Now, these also included cities covered under the National Clean Air Program, which was, I think, a program launched by government where specific cities were selected which were more vulnerable to air pollution problems. So, can you expand upon what were the major issues still leading to this kind of increase in air pollution and worsening of air quality?
So I think there are some cities we've seen, where, for example, even Mumbai, the number of monitoring locations have been, increasing over time, and they have been investing in doing more and more monitoring, probably trying to get wider coverage. So what we saw in 2021 and 2022 is probably they had about 15 monitors. Now they're closer to 25 monitors. So when we try to compare averages across years, we do need to factor in okay, now they have a lot more data coming in than what was coming in earlier. But the analysis is done at the city level. So the average of 24 was more than the average of 22, primarily because the coverage has increased, and they usually put in monitors in industrial regions, in traffic junctions. So CPCB has a criteria of four kinds of locations. You can either be an industrial cluster, traffic cluster, a residential cluster, or a background cluster to get the representative levels in the city. So one section of cities are ones which are gradually increasing their monitoring. The others are, of course, where the air quality is definitely getting worse. Bangalore probably, I think, fell in that. Delhi, of course, Delhi has pretty much maintained the same levels across all the 4 years that we've been analyzing.
Yeah,
They are,
yeah,
it's a very wicked problem for Delhi. They have stayed,
yeah.
yearly average is around 100 micrograms, which is
Hmm.
shocking because 5 is what is recommended.
Hmm.
So there are cities like those which have worsened over time. I think we are trying to do some causal analysis, causal inference analysis, and we're finding that the land use land cover is definitely showing some, inferences can be drawn that some
Hmm.
cities have dropped their green cover by about 25 to 30%. So that could probably be a reason why we are seeing more levels in those cities.
Interesting. Before I move to the positive side, there is one contradictory kind of thing that I saw. Maybe you can explain how these things work. So, within the data that you showed, a couple of cities were worse off with respect to air quality. And these were Gurgaon and Faridabad, which are pretty neighboring ones. Neighboring to Faridabad is another Haryana city of Palwal, which happened to reduce their air pollution by 50%. Now, with a range of 40-50 kilometers, how can there be that one city has much worse air quality and then one has a drop in air quality actually?
So specifically this one which has improved, I'll need to look in, but it could potentially be because Gurgaon has a large number of monitors.
Hmm.
So to show improvement, they'll need to show improvement in all the 15 or 20 monitors. Versus
Yeah.
if it's a smaller town, there's a good chance that it could just be one monitor.
Okay.
So what
Hmm.
happens is that showing improvement in that one singular location becomes more doable.
Hmm.
So the disadvantage of bigger cities is that they have invested in larger networks, and
Hmm.
that's why it's more difficult to game a much larger network versus you can more easily kind of control, or I don't want to say manipulate, but
Yeah. Okay.
you can, if it's a singular location, then you can do the mitigation in a more controlled way
Hmm.
versus the monitoring. And that's why we've been pitching for hyper local throughout the city
Yeah.
to be the more representative way of doing this tracking. But very sadly, a large part of NCAP cities have only a
Hmm.
single monitor.
Actually, again, just to follow up, since we already mentioned in the conversation and we already all talked a bit about this problem of hyperlocal versus big picture kind of solving. Post a few months back, you wrote, and I'm quoting here, that while the theory of change towards implementing clean air via NCAP may be justified by some, saying that the problem is so big that there is no point diagnosing it, and the efforts and funds should only be spent on rectifying the problem. But such mandates at the national level signify a myopic vision. This was obviously as a response to an order by CPCB, where they said that if in case a state has not utilized their funds, they should not invest more in monitoring of the situation. Can you elaborate on the two sides mentioned here as to how much monitoring becomes important from a mitigation perspective, from an evaluation perspective, and then why are we having a different perspective in this way to just solve it out?
So, the most classic case and very easy to understand is, what happened in COVID. COVID was spreading like wildfire. It was assumed that, it was there in the whole country. So at some level, people had stopped testing for COVID because, you feel that the chances of getting COVID were so high that you just start working on the precautions, which is what the lockdown was, which is what the wearing of masks and
Mm-hmm.
everything. So, in conditions where the problem is so widespread and severe that you know that almost everyone is going to get it, the efforts start moving into just protecting and reducing the exposure. And in COVID they did that. Now, unfortunately, in air quality and air pollution, there is a belief that the problem is so big that we need to just go out there and start solving it. And we don't need to invest efforts in tracking and monitoring. Now, the reason I said it's myopic and what you've asked is, to explain the two sides of the coin, is that ultimately these kind of efforts, when done at the government level, see, if you are as your society take up some effort, it's okay. It doesn't matter. Or you are, as your RWA, your resident welfare association or your neighborhood try out something, it's okay. You don't need to invest in monitoring because it's a small regional effort. But when a national government says that, we don't need to invest in monitoring and tracking, and we just want to go out and solve the problem, it's myopic because you're not going to know what is solving the problem. Air pollution is a very complex science. On one
Yeah.
hand, it's like the odd even. The Delhi government implemented odd even, but all the results found that there was no tangible drop in air pollution, maybe maximum
Mm.
5%. Now, is it easy enough to tell whether odd even failed or succeeded? It's not, because odd even, maybe in parts it worked, in parts it didn't work. Now, without a very robust, monitoring framework, you are going to be keep on trying things in the dark. You may propose
Mm.
something like the smog tower was proposed, in
Yeah.
Delhi. They spent 15
Mm.
crores setting up that smog tower. Now,
Mm.
how much has it impacted that entire region's air quality? It needs to be evaluated with a very rigorous framework, and it was unfortunate that CPCB disbanded, this kind of monitoring, or it didn't bring in the required hyperlocal monitoring. So we feel, and we are seeing that the rest of the world actually is implementing good quality systems. A fine balance between the very high end expensive regulatory networks, which cost about 1.5 crore per monitoring site, to the citizen focused network, which will cost a 1.5 lakh rupees. So the difference is almost 100x
Yeah.
in that, but that balance needs to be found, which in India has not yet been established.
Interesting. And then clearly the next point of is to be considered that unless a proper monitoring network hasn't been established, there is no point in solving for, just like you said right now, for smaller towns they may have just one monitor, which may or may not suffice. But then, if you want to do a causal analysis, it might not be sufficient. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think that's our contention, that it doesn't take that much to have a robust network.
Hmm.
London has close to, I think, 1,000 monitors. Now, London
Hmm.
is very comparable to Delhi and Bombay, but Delhi and Bombay in all this time have not established anywhere close to that. We are not even at the 200 mark yet. So for us to put mitigation into place, we don't have that framework for evaluation if our actions are working or not. So that is where it is. Yeah.
Are funds the only problem because of which we are not able to go towards a London level of monitoring system, or are there some other issues also?
Actually, funds is not a problem. Funnily enough, whichever agency we have talked to, they've said the funds are ready and they are available. I think the bottleneck is that there isn't a very cohesive vision by which this is being executed. There is
Hmm.
a lot of fragmented approaches, but
Hmm.
the way Aadhaar or UPI was implemented,
Yeah.
they had a single-minded belief that Aadhaar needs to be implemented or
Hmm. Hmm.
UPI needs to be implemented, and it was rolled out very quickly. And that
Hmm.
kind of belief is needed for air quality. That we
Hmm.
need to roll out air quality monitoring and mitigation systems at scale, completely across the country. Otherwise, what is happening is in patchworks. Like UP tried something because a little bit of funds were available. Bihar is
Hmm.
trying something because the government was, open, but Maharashtra and Karnataka is seeing a lot of resistance. So it's a very, very fragmented way in which the country is trying to solve this.
So when you talk of resistance, this is resistance from the government bodies itself or from communities or something?
Yeah, no, primarily from the regulators, because
Okay.
their point is that there is not enough standardization that has happened. They put the ball back in the court of BIS, the Bureau of Indian Standards. Now, the BIS has
Hmm.
already commissioned this work to NPL. Now,
Hmm.
NPL and other agencies, they haven't released this. Now, for 4 years, they've been sitting on this proposal to release the standard, and
Hmm.
it's a very long time to have not released it. So the point is that who will bell the cat?
Yeah.
Nobody is willing to take the charge that we will roll this out. You
Hmm.
know, so it's hanging in balance.
Wasn't Supreme Court involved maybe a year or a couple years back where they ordered for the air quality data and all of these things from cities? Did that lead to some progress when the apex body kind of did a push there, or it's eventually led to this outcome itself?
See, the apex body, even the Lok Sabha actually frequently takes up the topic. We've been
Hmm.
tracking the questions in the Lok Sabha around industrial pollution,
Hmm.
and there are some ministers who will ask this question, and then all the
Hmm.
industrial pollution data is tabled. The Supreme Court has also, so the Supreme Court has, of course, set up the CAQM, the Commission for Air Quality Management.
Hmm.
And I think what is happening is the bottleneck is that as per the governance laws, the
Hmm.
final responsibility is going to rest with the Central Pollution Control Board.
Okay.
The Central Pollution Control Board and the state pollution boards, frankly, don't have the resources, don't have the necessary resources to push this out. So while your earlier question I answered saying that funds are enough, a lot
Hmm.
of state bodies have the funds. There is a misallocation and probably misprioritization happening, because of which
Hmm.
we are ending up in this situation.
Okay. Turning our heads to the positive side of it, in your report itself, there were a couple of cities through efforts beyond NCAP. Also, there were cities outside of NCAP. To name a few, it was Varanasi, Kanpur, Meerut, Jodhpur, Agra. These all have been able to reduce their emissions by around 50%. And what is the story behind the success here?
We have honestly been surprised by the level of improvement in a couple of these UP cities.
Hmm.
They have shown improvement, but to be honest, we have our own larger network where also
Hmm.
we are seeing the improvement. So while the
Okay.
government network is showing a 50% improvement, our network is also showing a reasonably sized improvement. So looks
Hmm.
like the actions on the ground, probably they are doing better dust control on the roads. They are
Hmm.
probably containing their waste burning. They're probably, I think waste management has improved in several cities. From
Hmm.
what I
Hmm.
understand, waste collection and ensuring it is not burned is now done in a slightly better way than it was being done a few years back. So I think from what I know, road dust management efforts,
Hmm.
waste burning efforts have stepped up.
Okay.
Industrial pollution, the data is not so easily available. That is
Hmm.
what the Lok Sabha conversations, if you go and search for the continuous emissions monitoring data, SEMS data, those are the industrial pollution data sets.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
they are not so easily available, so it's not so conclusively we can tell whether the industrial pollution is increasing or decreasing. But
Hmm.
I think the civic bodies and the civic related efforts probably are paying off.
All right. So these are very much replicable in other cities. It's now a matter of intent for other civic bodies.
I think so.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right. Okay. I want to understand how the system kind of works. We mentioned a lot of times on how your network is also tracking a few things. So as has been mentioned within your profile that the sensors deploy an IoT kind of system. So let's say I'm in any city, let's say Pune itself, and you have deployed 100 sensors. So the tracking of reduction and or increase in pollutant levels. How do the sensors track? If I have to put it in a very simple terms.
So, in very simple terms, we track about six pollutants. We track PM
Okay.
2.5, PM10,
Hmm.
NO2, ozone, CO, carbon monoxide,
Hmm.
and SO2.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can also track things like CO2 and TVOC,
Hmm.
but those two don't make up the AQI. The AQI
Okay.
is primarily made up of these earlier six
Hmm.
pollutants that I talked about. So we
Hmm.
track all of them and we track them on a per, literally on a per minute basis, but we
Hmm.
analyze them on a per hour basis. So the
Okay.
granularity of their data is quite significant.
Hmm.
Literally per hour data you will have from 100 locations in a city. So you're going to get a very fine grained picture of what actions are causing what kind of effects on the air quality. Because we know that early mornings people tend to burn things, especially in a colder city in the colder months, to
Hmm.
keep themselves warm, to for their water needs, for their cooking
Yeah.
needs. Burning is a very common phenomena. Even in Pune, we see it a lot. So that
Yeah.
immediately shows up. So
Hmm.
tomorrow, when let's say a government effort is made in terms of supplying all these households with smokeless chulas or gas connections or the subsidized gas cylinders, then we can quickly evaluate whether these neighborhoods or these localities are seeing a drop or not. And those
Okay.
kind of experiments have been done, and the drops have been seen. So it's a very evidence based approach to implementing policy, and you
Yeah.
can quantify how much drop can be seen by just giving subsidies in gas cylinder or giving these smoke free chulas.
Okay. Interesting. Great work from your end. I'm now moving one segment upwards in our conversation because we have mentioned a few points here, and I think it makes sense that I start with this right now. I want to bust a few myths with respect to air pollution, and if you can tell me whether this is true or false. So I'm going to start with the first one, that we are better off indoors during times of smog and bad AQI. Is this true or is it false?
Not necessarily true. I
Okay.
would say by default, probably you could be worse off sometimes because outdoors, if there is some wind blowing, then the
Hmm.
levels may kind of reduce. Indoors, the wind, if you are not filtering the air inside, then the
Hmm.
air is going to be trapped indoors. So
Hmm.
if there is a smog episode outside, if you have closed your windows early on and you have a certain degree of clean air, then you can potentially be better off. But
Hmm.
this is yeah, it needs more information to bust the myth that indoors is better
Okay.
or not.
Okay. But this cannot be a blanket statement.
It's
All
not a
right.
blanket statement.
All right. Okay. Talking about indoors, I'll go with the second myth here, which is kind of a new one that I've heard across many people who are residents of Delhi. That air purifiers inside your home make you more susceptible outside, since it makes you less immune to air pollution or air with bad quality. So, is this true or false?
This, I think, is quite false. I mean, I'm not
Okay.
a believer that being exposed to pollution improves your immunity. I
Okay.
think that is a very bizarre logic, according to me. And I would not subscribe or I would not recommend anyone to,
Mm.
put their loved ones by exposing them to pollution. I think you're always better off safer by not being exposed. And
Mm.
as far as my knowledge goes, this is a myth that you need to be exposed to pollution to be immune to it.
As a follow up to this, if someone is to buy an air purifier, what three four things would you recommend to check beforehand so that the indoor air quality is generally ensured?
So I think I of course have air filters in my home also. I have young kids, so I've
Hmm.
invested, and I think that I have not bought big brand air filters
Hmm.
as you would imagine
Hmm.
since I'm in this field.
Okay.
I look for the ratings of the filter.
Okay.
A HEPA filter, is
Hmm.
considered very of very good quality. So if it is a
Yeah.
genuine HEPA filter or a
Hmm.
MERV 13 and above, or a MERV 15 and above filter.
Okay.
Now, the flip side of buying a HEPA filter is that your energy cost will start going up because
Okay.
uh,
Hmm.
the thicker the filter or the more robust the filter, the more energy is needed to suck the air through that filter.
Got
So
it. Yeah.
after the filter rating comes the fan rating.
Okay.
What is, and the fan rating actually is given in the units of something known as CADR, which is the
Hmm.
clean air delivery rate.
Okay.
So you should look at what the CADR is, and the
Hmm.
higher the CADR, the better is the performance of the fan, of the suction
Okay.
filter. So, usually a CADR of 10, 12, 15 is considered good.
Okay.
I think the cheap
Hmm.
filters will give you a CADR of probably 3, 4, 5,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
will not be adequate for a room of the size of 200 square feet and above.
Yeah.
So the filter ratings, the CADR rate, and then I would say, if it is an activated, I mean, basically besides PM, what else can it mitigate? you know
Hmm.
so PM is
Okay.
one primary pollutant that the filter will mitigate, but I believe you get treated filters which can take out a few more pollutants also. So I think those are the parameters, but primarily I would look at filter ratings, the CADR, and the energy consumption, because
Of
ultimately you
course.
don't
Yeah.
want to pay double the electricity bill just because
Hmm.
you're running an air filter.
Interesting. And do you recommend having, obviously, I mean, it goes without saying, but then again, to measure the air quality, a meter of what's the current air quality or something, do you recommend that
I
should be
mean, I
there?
would say that if you're a techie, if you're a guy, if you're a person who's into data and
Hmm.
tracking things, yes, it's an
Okay.
interesting device to have.
Hmm.
And for the very lay audience, maybe not, because
Hmm.
you also get IKEA, I believe, launched something for literally 5,000 rupees, which just gives you
Hmm.
colors, the six colors,
Okay.
and sometimes
Okay.
maybe even just that is enough. Whether are you in the
Okay.
green, yellow, red, whatever kind of
Okay.
thing.
Hmm.
But if you are really into like multi-pollutant pollution tracking the way we are, then those equipment will cost you about a lakh of rupees.
Oh, okay.
That's the
Interesting.
challenge in, because I would say that if you're getting into data, then might as well get into good quality data,
Yeah,
and
of
good
course.
quality data with all the pollutants will cost you, somewhere between a lakh of rupees and above. So that's a huge investment to make.
Okay. Coming back to myths and speaking of pollutants, PM 2.5 is the only culprit of air pollution. True or false?
That's false, because the actual AQI is made up of 12 parameters. But the primarily, I think six pollutants remain important in the urban context. So in a city
Hmm.
context, I think you at a minimum need to track PM 2.5, PM 10,
Hmm.
NO2, ozone, CO, and SO2.
Okay.
So I think what happens is PM 2.5 is tracked because it's an outcome of all the other pollutants. It's called a
Okay.
secondary pollutant. So if there is
Hmm.
PM 2.5, there is a very high chance that the other pollutants have already existed in the air for a good amount of time.
Hmm.
So people, and it's cheaper to track PM 2.5 than to track or monitor
I
other
see.
pollutants. But if you
Hmm.
are a serious practitioner of clean air, wanting to drive clean air change, then you need to track at a minimum six parameters.
Okay. Coming to the next myth, air quality is bad only during winters. During the rest of the year, air quality is pretty much manageable and not a problem to you.
That's a complete myth. You know,
Hmm.
I think other than monsoon, I think
Hmm.
monsoon and especially monsoon when the rains are there, the pollution does get washed out. But
Hmm.
I would say outside of monsoon, it's a year-long phenomena. So
Okay.
be it summer, be it spring or whatever other seasons that we have here, but I
Hmm.
would say you need to be careful in pretty much 10 out of 12 months, or at least 9 out of 12 months.
Okay. That kind of solves my next myth also, which was, does rain wash out pollutants? Uh,
It does to a good degree, frankly.
okay.
The
Hmm.
rain does take care of a lot of the
Hmm.
dust pollution. The gas
Hmm.
pollution, it may not so much impact the
Hmm.
NO2,
Hmm.
SO2 ozones. So those can still remain a cause of concern, but the
Hmm.
PM pollution does get washed out with the rain.
Okay. And then are general humid environments, for example, Mumbai or let's say Chennai, who have generally high relative humidity levels, are these better off because of heavier air leading to settling down of pollutants? Is there something like that as a myth?
Not really. I think humidity by itself will not clean out the pollution.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I don't think, in fact, there will be the smaller the particles, the PM1 and PM 2.5, in fact,
Hmm.
will be hygroscopic, so they absorb the humidity, uh,
Hmm.
and so their effect may still be very much present when the
Hmm.
humidity increases.
Hmm.
So, yeah, humidity by itself doesn't solve anything.
Okay. One last myth here: blowing of winds is better than a more stagnant air. So, a city which has more winds flowing here and there will have lesser bad air.
That by and large may hold true.
Hmm.
In Delhi, I'm not sure because there is a continuous, the way the air gets trapped, especially in winter months,
Yeah. Hmm.
when the mixing height comes down, even
Hmm.
if there is wind and air movement, you may not see any substantial improvement. But
Hmm.
coastal cities, probably when they get fresh wind coming from the outside, I think
Hmm.
those cities probably the air does. But you have to also be mindful that at least in Mumbai and now I think the marine pollution is getting featured, which is
Hmm.
from the marine vessels.
Okay.
In port cities, it is actually known to be a very big cause of concern.
I
So,
see.
so in fact, Singapore is very stringent on air quality standards because it's one of the biggest ports in the world. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but to answer your question, it's not a complete myth that winds will reduce pollution. There is some element of truth to it.
Okay. So, why Mumbai or other coastal areas of India will have more pollution? It's primarily because of, like you said, fresh air needs to come in, and because of marine vessels, the air itself quality is bad. Is that what it is?
Funnily, the most recent source apportionment study from Mumbai, which was
Mm.
released just a few months ago, attributed
Mm.
marine pollution to be one of the biggest causes for Mumbai, which was a surprise for
Wow.
us also. Honestly, we've been tracking
Okay.
this issue for a long time. So they're attributing it to, marine pollution and not to any local uh,
Mm.
issue
Yeah.
within the city, which we don't know how, correct that could be. Uh, but the fact is that, yeah, in a lot of port cities, it has been documented that, the levels are very, very high because of the marine vessels coming in.
Wow. That is interesting to know. All right, that was our busting of the myth section. And I now want to switch over to you decided to become a climate entrepreneur. And the first question is, in fact, on this part itself, that in a very old post you have mentioned, and I'm picking up specific parts, that you were a reluctant entrepreneur. Why do you say that?
So I think, frankly, air pollution, I'm not natively from that domain. I have the
Yeah,
classical computer science, computer engineering background,
yeah,
as most techies do in India. So I did the whole, US stint working in Silicon Valley. I was fascinated with products, over
mm,
services. So the
yeah,
bent I always had was to invest effort in building out a product, over doing the consulting and services model.
yeah,
But so I think my journey in this space began in 2014 when, I received some funds from India Spend. So India
mm,
Spend was the first organization which, just based on a very small one day interaction decided to fund the air quality work. So there was no
okay,
elaborate business plan. There was no elaborate,
mm,
vision that was communicated. It was just a conversation with the founder at India Spend. And he said, okay, let's do it. And he started putting money on the table to start building these things. So I kind of stumbled into building it and it really took off, uh,
mm,
to the point that it started getting national attention. We were thrown on live
mm,
TV with cabinet ministers, discussing data. And suddenly we realized that we need to invest a lot of, money and time in improving the technology. And it was little bit kind of that, the funds started coming in and then we had to register the company because that was the only way we could, receive those funds and all. So that was the part which was reluctant because the whole, I'm more into product development. So I
mm,
would have
mm,
happily continued building the product if somebody would have if somebody would
yeah,
frankly had a company and I could have just built the product out. But at that point, I couldn't find anyone, who was building air quality monitors. So
yeah.
then I had to start the company. So that was a reluctant part because the headache of running the company is not something I truly enjoy.
In a separate podcast, NVIDIA's founder mentioned he was asked that if went back, what would you do different? To which he replied that I will not do anything different, otherwise I won't be where I am. So if I ask you the same question, would you do this differently, or you are not regretting taking this reluctant decision?
I'm not regretting taking the reluctant decision. I mean, I still would do many of the things that I have done, but
Hmm.
I think there are two, three things that I've learned along the way. Probably after interacting with startup founders abroad, is that
Hmm.
we've spent way too long in trying to build this out. At the 7 year mark,
Okay.
we are still trying to roll out the product and things like that.
Hmm.
Whereas I've seen, frankly, folks who are probably your age or 10 years younger to me have the stamina to go, global and international very quickly.
Yeah.
I still come from a generation where we are very tentative in going international. It doesn't come
Hmm.
naturally to us. But
Okay.
the younger generation, the 25-year-olds and the 35-year-olds are very bold. They
Hmm.
take on much more riskier bets in going international. So I think probably those are some things I would have done differently, you know,
Hmm.
if I was starting now versus starting, 7 years ago.
Okay. You also mentioned the challenges you had with funding initially. I read somewhere that initially when you started working on this, nobody was ready to, kind of invest into this product unless, of course, until India Spend came along. So, but right now you are in collaboration with many big institutes, Center for Science and Environment, IIT Kanpur, and many others. So, is there a change of scenario today? Are entrepreneurs more empowered today to work on this?
So yes and no. I mean, actually, raising funds, has still not been that easy. We have
Hmm.
raised equity funding now, but
Hmm.
I would still say that the pure R&D bets nobody is making. To
Hmm.
stay on the cutting edge, people are still not investing. At least we've not managed to tap into those funds because of the very nature of the work we do, which is
Yeah.
it's at the intersection of the regulatory work where government has a lot of say and the
Hmm.
whole citizen impact side of things.
Hmm.
It doesn't have a very that strong a commercial angle as what most VCs would like. The
Yeah.
VCs want a very fast moving B2B product, and this
Yeah.
is not exactly fitting into their mold. uh,
Hmm.
so funding remains a challenge, but I
Hmm.
think we have decided to look beyond just the revenue and funding to say that we need to
Hmm.
continue building this. And I'm fortunate to have about now 24 employees, out
Hmm.
of which at least half of them are highly experienced. And they
Hmm.
have a similar belief that we need to solve this problem no matter what kind of funds and revenue line up. So I think a common set of belief in the team is helping us to that extent.
That, that's good to know. That's really good to know. And comes up my next question here. You mentioned regulatory bodies as kind of a hindrance to initiate funding and all those things. But if anybody is to work in this sector, unless of course their product is very B2C kind of thing or specifically B2B, anyone wanting to work or start a business in air pollution area to solve this problem will be interacting with government bodies. So, what challenges have you faced with government bodies in general?
Lots. I think that frankly will be a whole 1 hour podcast by itself, which I think I would have to do off the record more than on the record. But it's very tough. I mean, it is challenging. I think there is no
Yeah.
two ways about it.
Hmm.
Uh, the basic challenge is indifference. When you work with the
Hmm.
government, there is a huge section of the government which actually doesn't care. you know
Hmm. Hmm.
and if you are a motivated driven startup person, who's
Hmm.
wanting to make a difference, then you'll constantly run into this situation where they just don't they have the power, but they just don't care. you know
Yeah.
and that's the hardest set of people, and they may have the right degrees and credentials. They may come from IITs and all, and
Hmm.
they will occupy important positions, and then they
Hmm.
will not be interested in data. They'll say that
Okay.
we don't care about the data, we don't care about tracking, monitoring. So
Okay.
I think the challenge is, there. I would say about 10 to 15% of the people we've interacted are very passionate in the government.
Hmm. Hmm.
Frankly, maximum about 25%, I would say. So every three people out of four that you will meet will
Hmm.
not be very, so to speak, supportive of what you're doing,
Yeah.
but you have to keep persisting.
Hmm.
Um, that's why everybody goes global, because
Hmm.
stuff outside India definitely works better in these kind of spaces. They are more receptive to things. They move
Hmm.
faster. Uh, so that is the situation. So I would say that if you are getting into air pollution, then go global. Don't try to
Hmm.
just work in India.
Okay. If you want to, if I ask you, like what area specifically you can point to where budding entrepreneurs are people who have the skill sets, probably skill sets from a data perspective, skill sets from innovation perspective. or in general, overall creating a business perspective, can do in this air pollution region. I really wish that more people work on this so that people's lives improve. What opportunities will you point out?
I would actually, say there are three kinds of opportunities. There is one section of people who are very good at the consumer side of things.
Hmm.
Like yourself, you're doing a podcast, you will reach a lot of people. Your ability to connect to the community and the citizens is good. There is an inherent flair in doing that. Then the whole B2C model is a very viable model. The markets have completely opened up in indoor air quality, cleaning up. In fact, in that podcast of Nikhil Kamath,
Hmm.
Prashant Prakash makes a statement that you need to engineer homes which will have an AQI of 50. Now, that is definitely a huge opportunity and it's a solvable problem. It's
Yeah.
very much doable. Frankly, it will get solved in the next 5 years. The question is
Hmm.
who's going to do it. But it needs a lot of stamina because any B2C, as you know, is a very high stamina activity. You need to
Yeah.
constantly be reaching out to millions of customers. We
Hmm.
don't have it, so we are outside the B2C space. The
Hmm.
other is the industrial work, and that is
Okay.
the niche we are going after. Is that the industry values solutions, so they definitely value monitoring and tracking, but they want you to go with a lot of domain knowledge. So we work in the mining industry and we work in the oil and gas industry, and we understand their business quite well. We understand where exactly the monitoring needs to be done. So the
Hmm.
industry values domain knowledge, and you need to have fairly in-depth knowledge of the refinery business to go and
Of
mitigate
course.
pollution in the refinery. So we are pretty much in that space right now. We have taken three or four verticals. I know people who go after the steel and the aluminum industry or the rubber recycling industry. So there are lots of verticals, and each vertical has enough traction to be done. So
Hmm.
that is the second vertical in this space, and the third is, of course, the governance side. If you
Hmm.
know how to work the government system, the
Hmm.
maximum funds are sitting over there. You know,
Okay.
so the big ticket projects are over there, but you need
Hmm.
to have the ability to work with the government system, which some companies have and some don't. So we've tried it, and now we are not really in it. So I think it's the B2B, B2G, and the B2C, as they say, and all three are, I think, large enough domains.
Okay. Okay. What is next at Respirer? What, like you said, you're currently targeting the industrial sector. What new products, what new projects are you guys working on?
So we have two products which we are going to launch actually at the India Energy Week. One
Hmm.
is for the built environment, for buildings, actually for corporate and commercial buildings. Like I said, we are going to provide a complete energy efficient solution
Hmm.
to maintain AQI at under 50 for the whole building
Hmm.
throughout the year. So
Hmm.
we are trying to build out, and these are not just filtration systems, but these are completely algorithmically controlled demand control ventilation systems.
Hmm.
So the focus is going to be on the energy consumption while
Hmm.
cleaning up the air. So
Hmm.
that's one aspect of the work. The other is we are launching a methane monitoring solution
Hmm.
specifically for the oil and gas industry.
Okay.
So the new regulation, in fact, just which has come out last year, globally, is going to allow very unique kind of technology to be rolled out for methane monitoring, and we have a fair bit of experience in that kind of solution. So we are launching the methane tracking solution next week. These are the two mainstream ideas, and we are dabbling in some R&D around renewable energy and growing vegetables under solar PV. So that's some
Okay.
side activity which we have already initiated. But yeah, that's our so these two things primarily is what we are kind of focused on.
All right. So that winds up the section of our podcast where I wanted to know a lot of things from you. And now we are moving to the end of it, where I'm going to do the climate rapid fire. This is a fun segment on which I generally end my show on. It's a simple rapid fire. I'm going to ask you 8, 10 imaginative questions. I will need rapid answers from you, short answers from you, um, so that we entertain each other as much as possible. So, are you ready?
Yep. Let's go.
All right. So, in your daily life, a visual or a sight that kind of angers you and troubles you when it comes to climate change.
I think what angers me most is when people are burning things to keep
Hmm.
themselves warm or
Okay.
yeah, I just find that, it's they don't understand how much, they are breathing by burning things. And I see that happening all around me.
A book or an article or a video or any publication that you recommend to someone to understand the climate change issues can be on air pollution.
Okay, that's a good one. I think, funnily enough, actually, the series of articles published on India Spend, I mean, I
Hmm.
guess there's a bias because I work there, but
Yeah.
the climate change article series they do there, I
Hmm.
find it very interesting. So
Okay.
I think between India Spend and probably ProPublica. So I think
Okay.
more than books, actually, ProPublica's climate change series is
Hmm.
very impactful because they go
Okay.
really deep. I think, yeah, they have the very long form articles. So I
Hmm.
would recommend ProPublica and India Spend.
All right. A brand you think is doing great work towards environment.
I don't know which brand to call out. I think Uniqlo I've been tracking a little bit, and I think Uniqlo is
Okay.
doing an interesting job with regards
Okay.
to their clothes. And probably
Okay.
I use them, so I've been reading up on them. So maybe
Okay.
I might say Uniqlo, but I don't know how true that will be. But I
Okay.
have a feeling they are. I think there are a couple of Japanese brands which I think are doing good in the minimalism space. I forget the
Okay.
exact names, but I think Japan does that reasonably
Hmm.
well.
All right. On the flip side now, a brand you think can do much better work for the environment.
I would say all the big energy companies in India, frankly,
Okay.
they can do much better.
Okay.
While I have, tangentially tracked their work, maybe
Hmm.
they are doing, but I think given the size of the refinery companies, the energy companies,
Hmm.
I feel they can do a lot more in transitioning away from fossil fuels.
Okay.
So
All
that,
right.
yeah.
Okay. If given an opportunity to travel to the past, what mistake related to climate change would you like to correct?
The push away from coal, I mean, this probably because I work in the field,
Hmm.
should have happened much sooner. I think
Okay.
India has continued to be a coal driven country. And I have firsthand seen because I've traveled to the coal mines in Chhattisgarh,
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
Jharkhand as part of my work. And I feel the living conditions there are miserable.
Okay.
Nobody, in 2024 should have to live the way, communities in that region. And we
Hmm.
buy cheap coal. I mean, we buy
Yeah.
basically cheap energy. So
Yeah.
I feel it's not fair that we continue to have, few million people live like that.
Hmm.
So I think if I had to go back in time, transition away from coal much sooner.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel our construction and road conditions are very poor. Anywhere else I travel in the world, I don't see this level of dust from
Hmm.
construction and road and construction.
Okay.
I think these two areas I feel we should have brought the right technology 50 years back.
Okay. Great. Next is a two-part question. First part, what is your favorite place of travel? Anyone?
I very frequently go to Rishikesh. In fact, I'll be
Okay.
going there in a few weeks.
Okay. So second part to this question is, at this place, you're allowed to write one message on a big hoarding, which will generate millions of impressions. Caveat being, it should be about climate change and it should be a one-line message. So what will you like to write?
What would I like to write on the banks of? I mean, I go there because I find it very peaceful.
Hmm.
Um, so I guess the one line message that I may write is how can we have, Rishikesh kind of environment throughout India, so
Hmm.
that I don't need, I mean, I can get it in Mumbai and Pune, I don't have
Yeah.
to travel all the way, and only 1 week in a year I get it. So I
Hmm.
would like to understand, how can that kind of environment, living conditions be brought to all cities so that we can have 50 weeks of such life.
All right. Great. Some imaginative ones. So you have a superpower to talk to nature's ecosystems like lakes and oceans, forests, rivers, something like that. Whose problem would you like to listen to, and what will the problem be?
I would like to listen to the rivers, I think I would
Mm,
say,
mm,
because they are quite alive. They are moving from city to city, they are
mm,
transitioning and everybody is dumping things in them.
mm.
I live actually right next to the river in Pune and it's
Yeah,
healthy, honestly.
yeah, mm,
So it's a tragedy because I've lived obviously in Europe also. I've seen Amsterdam and the way the canals are and how what a vibrant economy gets built around the canals. Um, or in Norway when we went the fjords over there. But in India, I don't think we value our water bodies. So I think your question is if I could talk to some water body. I mean,
yeah.
so I think the rivers and yeah, basically look at how badly they're getting treated. You know.
All right. Okay. One, you have one more superpower now to interview one organism other than human beings. Who would you interview, and what do you think would be the topic of discussion?
Probably because I work in air quality, I would
Mm,
like to talk to maybe some birds and try and understand what they are seeing, around the world. I mean, especially the birds which migrate and stuff, is to get a sense of what their
see.
perspective is around the global situation. I mean,
Mm,
so
mm.
they have
All
the
right.
bird's eye view of the problem.
Okay. Final question. Given $1 billion right now, how would you use it to save our planet?
$1 billion, I think that's a good place to start. We would love that.
Mm,
Um, I think what I would do is definitely, evaluate the technologies. I mean, I would stay focused on air quality because that's the domain we understand.
yeah,
And I would use those funds to evaluate, high potential technologies and work on, I mean, I can tell you with methane, we are trying to do that actually. Is
yeah.
we are not just getting into monitoring, but we are getting into detection and repair and things. So I think essentially use those funds to go after both, the government and the industrial side of the pollution. We would work with city governments and we would work with industries to, I mean, I would still not use those $1 billion on the consumer side because consumer side still remains a very tough problem. We don't know how to engage in the B2C space, but yeah, we would go after, city level governments. We would, and this is happening, London and all are doing it. So we would take, cues from that. But yeah,
Mm.
we would use $1 billion in that.
All right. Ronak Sutaria of Respirer Living Sciences, ladies and gentlemen. Ronak, thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I know I did a lot, and I hope to talk to you soon.